I'm pleased to welcome Larry Veino, who is the CTO, Chief Technology Officer at Focus Technology.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about the APEX as-a-Service stuff, but I always like to make sure that we set the stage so everybody understands where we're coming from and we're all kind of speaking common language. So I'll start with talking about some of the trends that we're seeing in the data center. We'll talk a little bit about how whether folks want to admit it or not, we have been living and will continue to live in a hybrid world for quite some time. And then we'll dive into the Dell APEX offerings and why those offerings are actually meeting some of what customers have been asking for, looking for, and we go through the trends. So most folks recognize that this is where we've come from, right? We would traditionally build a data center or work with a colo provider, get some space, and then put our gear in there, right? There's a lot more that goes into this, right? But we're going to try to keep it simple for the context of this conversation. So, the stack is typically your compute, your networking, your storage vendors of choice. Sometimes folks standardize, sometimes they don't, right? And then we back up those environments to protect them. We replicate those environments. For both business continuity, whether that's snapshotting, local copies, local replication, and also for business continuity. Oftentimes you go offsite, etc. And then, when you have your stack, if you want to really have a cloud and you follow the NIST definition, you have to add some kind of a management orchestration or management and automation layer on top of that stack to allow you to do automation and all these fun things. That's when you truly have a cloud, right? So that's kind of where we started traditionally. That's what the world looked like. And back to my point about DRBC, oftentimes there were a couple sites involved. They didn't have to be the same caliber. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. There's usually a couple. In the last decade or so, we've seen an emergence of edge sites. This is due a lot to the IoT trends we're seeing. Equipping lots of devices with sensors, whether that's police cars, ambulances, school buses, tracking delivery trucks, right? All these things. All this data is being generated, and in most cases, it is being collected at edge sites. Big difference between the bigger boxes and the edge sites are the bigger boxes. Typically, you've got pristine conditions, right? Great power, fantastic cooling, nice filtration, right? So it's very clean air. That's not the case often with these edge sites. It can be in a closet at a gas station. It can be at a remote facility, right? They're typically not as nice and pristine. So what that means is the equipment needs to be different as well. It needs to be able to handle high temperatures or low temperatures. It needs to be able to handle dirty air and all those fun things. So that's kind of the traditional world we've come from. Then enter the public cloud, right? You can do all the same things that we see on the traditional side on the left with the public cloud on the right. Amazon, Azure, and others all sprung up. And we're going to talk a little bit about why they did and what the benefits were there. So if we think about some of these trends that we're seeing, or things customers ask us about, or things customers tell us they're trying to do, let's start with financial. So a lot of folks said to us, we want to try to reduce the overall cost of IT. In some cases, that's because IT is still looked at as a cost center. In some cases, it's not, but they still want to try to put some guidelines or guardrails on how much they're spending on IT. Some folks have asked us how they can shift from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. So instead of outlaying capital, reducing liquidity, they want to figure out how they can pay more as you go kind of spending. And others are looking at consumption-based spending. Why can't I just pay for what I need rather than buying ahead and hoping to grow into it? And then, of course, right-sizing IT headcount. Do we have the right people in the right roles in the organization? Usually, this is a challenge in large organizations that have larger kind of siloed groups. It's less of a concern in the commercial down, where most folks are kind of Swiss Army knife engineering folks anyway. They do lots of different things. That's the financial side we're seeing with trends. There's also the operational side, right? Everybody who wants to be more agile, right? You can say that from the beginning of time, right? If I can do more and I can do it faster, right? That equals better value for my customers equals better value for my P&L. So agility is really, really something most customers are trying to attain. Improved deployment times, as we've seen in the past. I have a friend of mine who refers to these application stacks in the old days as, the cylinders of excellence, right? If I wanted to roll out, a CRM tool, if I was going to roll out messaging, I would stand up a stack, my compute, my networking, my stores, get it all configured. I would overlay on top of that my application, make sure everything works, do the testing, and then I could bring that into production. Well, that takes time, right? And everybody wants to move faster, so people are looking to improve those deployment times. Resiliency, right? People don't want to be down. Depending on your business, the cost of being down can be really, really large. So, first we like to talk to customers, make sure they understand their environments, understand how those environments are configured, protected, etc. Understand their business, what cost of outages are. But, in general, people are trying to improve on their deployment times. And resiliency, don't go down, right? If a site has an issue, we want to be able to continue running from someplace else, right? That can be a site, that can be a region, right? We all just went through Hurricane Ian, right? That was certainly a regional effect when it comes to IT. So resiliency is important. And we hear this a lot. We hear people say to us, I want to get out of the data center business. And so we try to dive in a little bit more and understand, what does that really mean? Does that mean you don't want to own gear anymore? Does that mean you don't want to maintain gear anymore? Does that mean you don't want to use precious real estate in your own offices for IT infrastructure anymore, right? So a lot goes into that one bullet point, but that's one of the trends we're seeing a lot of folks saying, how do I get out of the data center business? So from an economic perspective, as I mentioned before, the left side of the screen was traditionally, that's why I say typically, CapEx, right? So, we would buy ahead. That requires forecasting, right? Understand what our business needs are going to be, talk to the application folks, understand their growth, right? And try to guess, right? Best guess on what we're going to need. That also requires planning for physical space. I'm going to buy equipment. I have to put it somewhere, right? For the old rack tile math. But it was also predictable spending, typically. You would look at your stuff, do forecasting, and you would essentially purchase and know that this is my spend for the next X number of years, right? But back to the deployment conversation from the previous slide, it was a slower deployment time. It took a little while. You had to figure out what you needed, right? That doesn't happen overnight. You have to order the gear, look at all the supply chain issues we're having today, right? It used to be, 2 to 4 weeks, sometimes 6, the worst. Now we're seeing some supply chains 12 months or more out, right? Networking is a particular area that's really suffering right now. So those things take a lot of time. If you can't get the gear, you can't deploy it, that's a challenge, right? So that was the left side. The right side was about OpEx, right? Pay as you go, less of a need to forecast. And I say that because lots of folks early on in the cloud trend move were actually surprised by the cost of public. Like, they looked at the website, they looked at those published prices and said, oh, this is going to be so much cheaper. Then they started using, the usage went up, and they were surprised by much higher bills than they expected, right? Not always the case, but that was certainly the case with a fair share of the market, right? So I say less of a need to forecast, not no need to forecast. We still have budgets, right? Everybody gets money allocated from the top down, so we still have to understand what our spend is going to be. Definitely don't need to plan physical space. That's someone else's problem now, right? Whoever you choose to partner with, those folks have to worry about the physical space. You just have to worry about turning up services as you would like. I mentioned the spending piece, right? It's less predictable. One of the things we've seen a lot of, to be blunt, is in order to make sure that the economics make sense, if you want to make a pivot from private to public, a lot of folks were not doing ad hoc. Instead, they were basically committing to minimum spends, right? So, basically talk about like reserved instances and stuff like that. So they would say, okay, look, I'm going to commit to spending this much, and in turn, the cloud providers will commit to charging you less than ad hoc, as you go price. The downside to that was, in a lot of cases, customers didn't meet those commitments, right? So then much like on the left, where you might buy ahead and hope to grow into it. We see a little bit of the same happening in the public cloud space, right? So just something to keep in mind. But it is very fast in terms of deployment times. Up, right? Figure out what you want to do, how you want to consume those resources, and boom, right? Those things are up and running. Now today, it's gotten a little more interesting. So the public cloud folks have acknowledged that not every use case is best served by having your assets in a public cloud data center, right? So they're moving their services, their software, their operating environments on premise, right? Two of the more popular, Azure Stack from Microsoft and Outpost from AWS. Right? That's them taking their stack, right, the compute, networking, storage, their software, that MNO, M&A, and basically putting it in your data center and saying, here you go, you can still consume it via our tools like you would if it was public, same look and feel, but it is actually on-prem as opposed to in the cloud. And so that customers started to look at that, so that makes a lot of sense. The traditional vendors looked at it as well and said, well, we can do some of the same. So that's where the APEX story starts to come into play. Customers were asking for more flexible financial models. Customers were asking for a different way to consume IT, and Dell responded with their APEX portfolio, which we're going to go into full detail in a few minutes. So even Andrew Jassy, right, the CEO of AWS, has admitted, as I mentioned earlier, that there are legitimate reasons why you would not want your infrastructure to be anywhere other than right next to the people using it, right? Just a few of those reasons are compliance in some cases, although fewer and fewer as we move forward and people realize how secure public cloud can be. In a lot of cases, how much more secure those data centers are than a customer managed facility. Certainly not a colo. Colo is also equally secure as public. Latency, right? Some of these applications, you think about some of the edge use cases, machine learning, AI, the analytics space, right? Latency can be the go or no go for an infrastructure, and of course cost, right? If you know exactly what you need for resources, you're almost always going to pay less if you're going to consume it as your own. You're going to buy the stack, you're going to put it in your facility or in a colo versus consuming that in a public cloud model. So now you can have the best of both worlds, right? Whether it's the pay-as-you-go options, whether it's instead of outlaying capital, right, moving that over from a CapEx to an OpEx model, and if one of your get out of the data center requirements was you don't want to manage gear and infrastructure anymore, you can accomplish the same thing, right? All through the Dell APEX offering. Now, before we jump into APEX, the last thing I wanted to just touch on briefly was when the cloud first emerged, a decade or so ago, and people kind of started to hit the mainstream, and they said, okay, we're cloud first. That wasn't a bad thing, but we always advocated for understanding what your applications were, understand your data, understand what your requirements are, who needs to access them, from where, all that fun stuff, and then understand what your cost points are. So we've seen a new approach in the market, to my point earlier, which is not a cloud first, but a data first approach. Understand those apps, understand what the requirements are, understand how best to deploy them, and then choose the platform that makes the most sense for you. And I won't get into a ton of detail that you see in the bottom here, but this is just how we at Focus Technologies always approach customer workloads, right? We want to understand that application. We want to understand its CPU, memory, networking, security, who it talks to, all these different things before we actually recommend where to actually move that application. So we believe this is a better approach. It saves you from the, oof, I didn't expect it to cost this much, right? So we approach the world. And to my point earlier, right, our whole go-to-market is actually around enabling our customers to be data-driven, whether that's helping them store that data, whether it's on-prem, cloud, SaaS, et cetera, and then how to make sure we protect that data. Security, everything we do has an eye on security. So we help our customers understand their environments better, help them get to any compliance requirements they need to satisfy or continue to maintain. We can help our customers manage those environments, either fully managed or targeted solutions management. As one of my friends in their services team likes to say, think of all the things that you do as a customer and you don't do well or you really don't want to do, and those are things we can help offset. Patching being one of the big ones, right? In IT, we're not really good at patching. We haven't been historically. So that's something that you can certainly offload to something like Focus to help make sure that you can meet those patching requirements. And then that fourth pillar is really transform. So once we've helped you store your data, secure it, and maybe or maybe not manage it, we want to help you transform your business by actually unlocking the power of that data. So that's our go-to-market. That's how we're helping our customers. And that's how we feel like we're well positioned to have these conversations with you around options in the market, like the APEX portfolio. So let's dive in a little bit to what APEX is. So kind of like I said earlier in those setup slides, multi-cloud is really the new path of data transformation. Those big applications we saw in the past, a lot of them have been moved to SaaS offerings. We don't see a ton of in-house messaging anymore. That's gone off to O365 and in some cases Gmail. We don't see a ton of CRM. We've got our ERP stuff, right? You've got the SAP, you've got Salesforce, all those big clunky applications that used to take a long time to get up and running and customize, and that would take forever to upgrade to new versions, have now kind of flowed off into the SaaS side of the house. So we live in a hybrid world, right? We've got applications all over the place, data all over the place. The things you have to think about are, how do I mitigate risk? How do I make sure I get the highest levels of performance, right? How do I make sure that my costs are going to be predictable? Again, ad hoc sounds great until we then come back to the fact that someone still has to budget for it, right? We still have to allocate funds, right, to pay for things. It's just not unlimited coffers, right? And we want to simplify operations, increase agility, and accelerate all innovation, right? But we want to do all of these things. We don't want to do left only. We don't want to do right only. We want to bring all these things together and do everything within one platform. So, my daughter goes to college down in college at Charleston, and there's this really neat spot. It's called the Four Corners of Law. There's the federal building on one corner, the state house on one, the city hall on another, and then a church on the other. So they call it the Four Corners of Law: federal, state, local, and God's law. Well, consider this the three laws of applications, right? The law of physics, the law of economics, and the law of the land. So physics is things I talked about earlier, right? What kind of latency requirements are acceptable? What's the user experience, right? If someone's clicking and watching things spin, that's not acceptable, right? And of course, data gravity. Laws of economics, right? Application future, hosting, egress costs, availability costs. The egress one is a big point. If you move all your data into a given provider, if you want to run a true hybrid environment, or if you want to do multi-cloud where you're replicating data amongst multiple clouds, you have to account for those egress costs. They are significant, right? So when we talk to customers and they're evaluating how they want to deploy their environment today and into the future, that's one thing we always talk about is, some providers have them, some providers don't. So it's important to understand what your options are. Availability costs, right? What is it going to cost me to make sure I attain the highest levels of availability? And then laws of the land, right? Compliance, sovereignty, security. Of course, these are extremely important today more than ever. Right? The last few years, we've seen unprecedented numbers of incidents. It's certainly quieted down a little bit the last year with the conflict in Ukraine, but we have seen in the last 90 days an increase again. And everybody knows not much has changed from a couple of years ago. So it's not that we're, in the most case, better protected. It's just that there has been less activity, right? We fully expect that to come back. So we have to continue to make sure we keep the eye on the ball when it comes to security. So why APEX? Well, if we talked about all those things earlier that customers are asking about, all those trends, things they want to see, Well, why not bring a lot of those boxes from the left and right into one box, right? And provide all of those things to customers, right? So designed for OpEx. We don't have to do the big cash outlay. Subscriptions are available in 1 or 3 year terms. Really simple procurement. There's actually a console that you can log into, you can register, and you can see all the different services. You can see the prices, right? Pricing is out there for everyone to see, right? This isn't one of those, oh, here's, if you want a service, contact your rep, right? It just like the public side, the pricing is published. You can see what it's going to cost you. Choice of management, right? If you want a partner like Focus to help you manage that, we can. If you want to manage it yourself, you still can. Or if you want the entire package and you want it from somebody like Dell, Dell can manage the entire stack for you. But you're going to get rapid deployment now, regardless of who's going to manage that, because of the software stack, tightly integrated components. So you can deploy your entire stack in as few as 14 days, a couple weeks, and be off and running. And you can now start delivering on business goals rather than worrying about and focusing on infrastructure and firmware and all those things. So this is the portfolio, and sometimes folks see this slide and they go, oh, it's complicated, there's too much stuff there. Dell EMC has done a really good job. I'm a former EMC, I spent 10 years there. I always thought they did a really good job of trying to close the seams that exist between product offerings, right? So when people say, well, how come they have so many different offerings? Well, the reason is because there's so many different use cases. There's so many different customer requirements. And what they want to make sure is that regardless of what your needs are, that they have the right solution to fit your needs. So if we started on the left, I referenced the console earlier. The console is that place where you log in, you can see the different services, you can pick what you want to consume, and boom, off you go. So if you start there, we move over to the stack with defined hardware definitions. You can do the APEX private cloud, you can do the hybrid cloud, or you can do the APEX cloud services with the VMware cloud. I'll get into in a second what the difference are between those 3 blue boxes. And then in addition to that, either separately or in collaboration, you can consume APEX data storage services. So some folks have kind of dipped their toes into this world by just doing storage as a service. Well, that's where APEX data storage services come in. Some folks are dipping their toes in this market in the backup and protection side house with APEX backup services, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a few slides as well. And the same holds true for the APEX cyber recovery services, right? If you put them all together, you have a nice as a service environment that encompasses all the major things I identified earlier in my little bubbles for whether it was public or private cloud. And then if you break out certain pieces of the overall solutions and you don't follow those hardware and software specs on the left, you can do APEX Flex on Demand. You can also do APEX Data Center Utility, which is essentially saying, hey, I want you to come in, I want to design a data center from soup to nuts, and I want the whole thing to be as a service. All possible with Dell technologies. And then, of course, if you one of your I want to get on the data center requirements is I literally don't want to have gear in my own facility anymore. Partners like Equinix can host that stuff all as part of this APEX umbrella, and channel partners like Focus Technologies as well. So again, lots of options. How do I decide which one's best for me? Well, it's a conversation, right? It can be as simple as I want APEX private cloud, right? And that stack is a VxRail, so it's a hyper-converged solution. So you get all of those components of the stack included in one box. You can move over to the right and say, I want hybrid cloud. Well, that adds a few things, right? You've got the SDTC manager to help you manage all those things. You've got your vRealize suite, right? That is the provisioning, right? I want to be able to provision assets based on, predefined definitions, right? Think of logging into public cloud provider and saying, please deploy this service. Same exact stuff with vRealize. You want to move applications around. They live somewhere today. Where they want to move to, right? The HCX software actually allows you to make these moves in a couple different fashions, but one of them could be live. You think this is GeoVMotion. I want to move a VM from this site into my new environment. I don't want downtime, right? That's what the HCX stuff enables. And then it can all the way down to virtual networking with NSX, vSAN, which allows you to virtualize your storage. Again, all sitting on that hyper-converged VxRail platform. And then the far right is that fully managed by Dell, infrastructure as a service, everything is included, including Tanzu. So if you're starting to go down the containers path and you want to look at managed containers, right, Tanzu is in there to help you there as well. So the box on the right is a fully Dell managed offering. The options on your left can be managed by you, the customer, or they can be managed by a partner like Focus. You have more flexibility. So to dive a little bit more into that far right option, right, APEX Cloud Services, VMware Cloud, right, this is taking all the infrastructure off your plate and saying, someone else now worries about that. I just have to worry about deploying my applications, running my applications, and really adding value to my business, right? The security is included in this offering. You will get the console. You can go in and consume different services, but it is fully managed on your behalf by Dell and allows you to just start rock and rolling on your business stuff. If you're not familiar with Tanzu, Tanzu is VMware's Kubernetes management platform, as I mentioned earlier. Really, it simplifies operations for your VMs and containers in one single environment. And it's accessible right through vCenter, right? So that same simplicity you're used to from vCenter exists with this as well. It allows you to really rapidly start deploying new containers in addition to existing VMs in that environment. So the security piece I mentioned earlier, right? The encryption keys are included, right? Dell owns and manages those keys on your behalf for this environment. Again, this is the far right, fully Dell managed. That allows you to minimize your internal risk profile. Dell is going to own updating that. Dell is going to own tracking for security vulnerabilities to make sure they get patched when they hit the market. And they're going to own anything that happens to that stack, 24/7 for the life of that environment. And you'll also get CSM, somebody who will be your single point of contact, a named individual, a name and a face you can work with that really helps you get that white glove treatment from Dell for this offering. Now, this is one that we're really excited about, the APEX Backup Service. This is a fantastic offering, either as part of a larger APEX opportunity or completely separate from a larger APEX opportunity. This service is fully SaaS enabled, meaning when you sign up with it, there's no need to buy a server, install the software, configure all this stuff. It's literally SaaS-based. You log in, you basically start identifying your infrastructure, setting up jobs, and you're off and running. The default, it is all cloud-based, meaning all the backups come across the cloud, all the restores come across the cloud. We're seeing fantastic performance when doing that, but there are still use cases where you're going to want to maintain some semblance of an on-prem backup, right? For those of you familiar with the 3-2-1-1, right? You always want 3 copies of your data. You always want 2 different medias, and then you want one offsite copy, and you want one copy that's air-gapped or offline, if you will, right? That can all be accomplished with the APEX Backup Service. They actually have an option called Cloud Server, or Cloud Cache, which uses the server locally to have a backup environment copy there, so you can easily restore in whatever environment you want to. But all that stuff is also still bled off to the cloud, where it is protected, segmented, and meets all the requirements at 3-2-2-1. It is extremely secure. It is one of the only in this space that has FedRAMP, GovCloud, FISMA, FIPS. So very powerful, very SaaS offerings, which you should be. They have all the certifications. One of the few to have those top-level government reports. The other nice thing about this offering is that built into the APEX Backup Service is Accelerator Ransomware Recovery. So what do I mean by that? Well, the system actually looks at the data out there. It's looking at machine language. It's looking at algorithms. And if it detects usual activity or it detects anything that matches given criteria, it will actually segregate those things for you. It'll tell you will you have clean backups versus compromised backups. Very, very powerful, and it allows you to have that offline air-gapped version of your data that in the event of some kind of an incident and somebody gets at your backup environment, they can't actually zero out and delete all of your backups. So very, very nice addition that helps keep folks nice and secure. And it doesn't matter what you're backing up, right? Yes, it is a SaaS offering, but if you want to back up on premise, that's fine. If you want to back up public, that's fine too. If you want to back up SaaS, right, your O365 environment, they've got you covered there as well. So the nice thing about this offer is it brings the simplicity of a SaaS offering with the power of an on-prem offering, and it allows you to back up anything in your environment. So you get a nice consistent approach regardless of where your assets live. And this is what the world looks like today, right? More and more customers are realizing that whether they had a commitment to hybrid cloud or not, they were committed to hybrid cloud. It just happened naturally, right? SaaS applications, a little bit of public, and then maybe a whole bunch of private, or flip that, right? But regardless, most of us are living in a hybrid world today, if not all of us. And for the folks that are concerned about scale and, well, how mature is this offering? How mature is this technology? Well, there are 4,200 cloud partners in 120 countries where this stuff is deployed. So it is a very, very large ecosystem. You have lots of options in terms of where you want this stuff to be located. So that whole concern about, you know, how new and how big is it scaled can completely be taken off the table. It is, you're talking about mature technology by a mature vendor with a very large partner ecosystem, willing and able to support you regardless of what your endeavors are and what countries you want to participate in. And thank you for those who attended. And again, my information is on the screen. Feel free to reach out. We love having conversations with customers and prospects and talking about where they are today and how we can help everybody move forward as this data center evolution continues.